Confronting racial inequality or addressing systemic racism and controversial solutions. Racial inequality is a deeply rooted issue in many countries, with a long history of systemic racism that has perpetuated economic, social, and political disparities between different racial groups. While progress has been made in recent years to address these disparities, there is still a long way to go, and the question of how to effectively address racial inequality remains a divisive issue. One of the most controversial approaches to addressing racial inequality is affirmative action, which seeks to redress historical discrimination by giving preference to members of historically marginalized groups in areas such as education, employment, and housing. Supporters of affirmative action argue that it is necessary to level the playing field and provide opportunities for those who have been historically excluded, while opponents argue that it is discriminatory and unfairly advantages certain groups over others. Another approach that has been proposed is reparations, which involves compensating individuals and communities who have been harmed by historical injustices such as slavery and segregation. Proponents of reparations argue that it is a necessary step towards addressing the ongoing impact of these injustices, while opponents argue that it is impractical and unfairly punishes current generations for the sins of the past. Police reform is also a crucial issue in the fight against racial inequality, as many marginalized communities have been disproportionately impacted by police brutality and discriminatory policing practices. Calls for police reform have included measures such as increased accountability for officers, de-escalation training, and demilitarization of police departments. However, these reforms have also faced significant resistance, with some arguing that they undermine law enforcement and put officers at risk. Ultimately, the question of how to address racial inequality is a complex and multifaceted issue, and there is no easy solution. It requires a sustained effort to dismantle systemic racism in all its forms, including addressing issues such as income inequality, access to education and healthcare, and housing discrimination. It also requires a willingness to engage in difficult conversations about race and privilege, and a commitment to working towards a more just and equitable society for all. In conclusion, addressing racial inequality is an ongoing and challenging task that requires collective action and a commitment to social justice. It is important to recognize the historical context of systemic racism and its ongoing impact on marginalized communities, and to work towards dismantling the structures that perpetuate these inequalities. We must continue to engage in dialogue and advocacy for policies that promote equity and justice, and strive towards a more inclusive and fair society for all. Let us all do our part in creating a world where everyone is treated with dignity and respect, regardless of their race or ethnicity.